There's really rigorous pest control going on. There's weed control going on. We do a better job of looking after it than the damn council.
All right, Pat, we'll follow it and probably talk to you or someone else on your group again.
Just one last thing, Jim, to think about on this. This is affecting the whole country. So this is happening all over the place, right? And one question we have for the council is you guys have thousands of hectares of council estate that could easily have SNAs put on it that would meet the RMA requirements. Why aren't you doing that? And I'll tell you, it's because they want to develop it. So instead, what they're doing is going after private landowners' private land.
All right, that's okay. And that's another day's discussion as well. Pat McShane, thank you. Just before we go today, Winston Peters got his waka jumping bill through Parliament last night. New Zealand First's 25th birthday celebrations at their annual conference in Tauranga this weekend.
They're celebrating.
A text says, why not just have made things simpler and give Winston 9 votes. Daylight saving time.
Same thing.
Has come around again in New Zealand. Will spring forward on Sunday. New Zealander Sandy Edmonds sang the best daylight saving song 50 years ago.
Daylight saving time, you're gonna give me more time to find love with my baby. Oh, daylight saving time.
I never thought of that. That's true.
She was a big star, Sandy Edmonds, in her day. And she went into the high end of the fashion industry in Australia and now goes by the name Rosalie Edmondson Corner.
You can sing about anything, that's what that
you can, that's right.
Anything's a song material.
I wonder how she feels about daylight savings at this point.
Well, I suppose we could have tried to find her and ask her.
That would have been good. Yeah, get her on.
But I'd sooner know how you feel, because there's been an enormous amount of pushback actually in the world recently against daylight saving. How do the two of you feel about it?
Look, I'm happy about it. It's just, to be honest, I never understand the arguments against it, and it's just been like this my whole life. So I don't really understand what the problem is, to be honest. I hate losing an hour. I don't like to be anywhere an hour earlier than I thought I would, but I'm just used to it.
Research shows losing an hour of sleep in the spring associated with a spike in heart attacks, more workplace injuries, increased cluster headaches, more cyber loafing, people miss more appointments. Ian, what do you think? Has Ian gone?
He skipped out an hour early. What do you think's happened there?
I have no idea what suddenly happened to Ian. The line's just fallen down. The great benefit of daylight...
Someone check in on Dunedin.
The great benefit of daylight saving in Australia is that fewer koalas are killed by motorists. This is in the journal Biology Letters, and that's because wild koalas are nocturnal, and most vehicle accidents with wildlife happen during the evening commute. So you don't understand the anger against daylight saving?
No, so what, is it just that we're getting, we have to turn up to work earlier or an hour? I mean, what are the arguments against it? Well, I do recall from years and years and years people arguing over it, but I've just probably never paid attention.
In the Boston Globe, the headline, "Dumb, Dangerous and Costly." I suppose I should elaborate on that. The essential argument actually boils down to leave our time alone, because an original rationale for daylight saving introduced, it's that time again, I hear the music, in Canada all those years ago has now disappeared. I don't have time to talk about this. Thanks to Ian in his absence. Becca Levin, thanks to you for your presence.
Yes, we must find out what happened to Ian.
Well, that's right.
He's missed a fantastic ending.
That's right.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, everybody, for listening to the panel. We are back on Monday, and Checkpoint follows.
No mai, haere mai o te hotaka o te ahiahi. Welcome to Checkpoint, I'm Alex Perrottet. On tonight's programme, Ruapehu Alpine Lifts will retire its ageing bus fleet in response to a deadly accident on Mount Ruapehu earlier this year. A former bus driver says two-wheel drives should never have been used as passenger shuttles on that mountain. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern draws applause, not laughter, at the UN General Assembly in a speech that challenged the anti-globalist Trump world order. Also in the USA, we'll have the very latest from a dramatic day at the Senate hearing for Supreme Court Judge nominee Brett Kavanaugh as he defended himself against sexual assault allegations. Students pause from exam preparation at Otago University for an anti-Proctor protest. We go to Matt Lauer about Hunter Valley Station, or at least his lawyer, and more on rodeos after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and aho. Passengers on board an Air Niugini plane have been rescued by a flotilla of small boats after the jet overshot the runway and came down in a lagoon in the Federated States of Micronesia. There are no reports of injuries. The ABC's Andrew Thompson reports.
The Boeing 737 with nearly 50 passengers and crew on board missed the tarmac and ended up in the lagoon near the Oceanside Airport in the Federated States of Micronesia. Videos and photos on social media show the plane floating in one piece in the water, with passengers and crew being rescued by several boats, with some standing waiting on the plane. Passengers filmed their own rescue. An accident investigation team from PNG is travelling to the crash scene.
Andrew Thompson. The United States Senate Judicial Committee is expected to vote overnight on whether to back the Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Mr. Kavanaugh angrily denied an accusation of sexual assault in front of a committee today. It followed dramatic testimony from his accuser Christine Blasey Ford, who told senators Mr. Kavanaugh attempted to rape her during a high school party. The BBC's Chris Buckler has more from Washington.
Both Christine Blasey Ford and Brett Kavanaugh gave powerful testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee, even if they were starkly different in tone. Dr. Blasey Ford was quiet, her voice shaking, as she talked about the long impact of an alleged attack 36 years ago, while Judge Kavanaugh spoke with anger as he denied he was in any way responsible. Republicans have been meeting following the hearing, and it's understood they plan to push ahead with a committee vote on his nomination within the next 12 hours. That could mean a final vote in Senate as early as next week.
Chris Buckler. Protesting Otago University students say they have chosen to forgive the university proctor who entered several student flats without permission and confiscated drug paraphernalia. More than 400 students protested this afternoon over the issue. Dave Scott, a former police officer, admitted he entered one of the flats while a resident was asleep upstairs. The students first demanded his resignation, but instead called for a new code of conduct for the proctor and campus staff. Josh Smith of the University Students Association says students decided to work with him.
We've chosen to forgive him. We realise that it's more powerful to work with a proctor that is humble and knows the power of this community than to have someone new, completely fresh come in and have to learn that all over again. And Dave, has apologised, and he's been dragged through the media, he's been dragged through a lot. We realise that there's more power in forgiveness than vengeance.
Josh Smith. The university says it's open to meeting with students to discuss their concerns. There are dire warnings about the fate of the world's killer whales. Scientists say some populations could be wiped out due to contamination from PCBs, a toxic chemical banned more than 30 years ago. The BBC's Jonathan Amos reports.
This chemical compound was once produced in vast quantities and used in everything from plastics and paints to electrical equipment and sealants. And although banned decades ago, has amassed in the environment, leaching into the ocean. Killer whales are the top predators, so they absorb all the PCB pollution taken in by the prey in their food chain. Researchers tell Science Journal that the damage to the orca's reproductive capability means many populations in the most polluted waters will likely be wiped out in the next 30 to 50 years.
Jonathan Amos. The researchers say the areas of worst PCB contamination are in the waters around California, Brazil and the Strait of Gibraltar. Winston Peters says harness racing has become an old man's sport and it needs to include younger people and women to make it great again. The Minister for Racing has told members of the industry at their annual conference in Auckland that dramatic changes highlighted in the Masada report need to be put into action. The report, which was released earlier this month, recommended the number of tracks to be almost halved and the TAB's commercial activities be outsourced to an international operator. Mr Peters says the industry has been static for the last 10 years and fresh ideas are needed.
I don't want to be too critical, but it's become a bit of an old man's sport when you need a whole lot of women and a whole lot of young people in the game as well. And so I can see an enormous opportunity in this country if we can but get syndication going and really quickly across this country and get out to get young people involved.
Winston Peters. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the world golf #1 Dustin Johnson feels his American team can defend their Ryder Cup title. The biennial event starts in Paris tonight, with Johnson teaming up with Ricky Fowler to play Europe's Rory McIlroy and Thorbjørn Olesen in the opening 4-ball competition. Johnson has played the Ryder Cup 3 times, including in the USA's win in 2016. He says all of his teammates are motivated to hold on to the cup.
We've got a really good group of guys. We're all very close. I feel like, we've got a very strong team. I feel like it's going to be a really good match. I think it's, like it has the past few years or the past few Ryder Cups. It's going to come down to the singles matches, and I feel like it's probably going to be fairly close.
Dustin Johnson. The US has not won on European soil since 1993, the year 3 of the current American team were born. New Zealand Cricket says it has no plans to hold international or domestic matches on Christmas Day. A report from Australia suggests players have agreed to play a Big Bash 2020 match on December the 25th, with players allowed to excuse themselves from the game based on religious beliefs. New Zealand Cricket's Public Affairs Manager, Richard Bock, says no plans for a Christmas Day game on this side of the Tasman are in the works, but adds they would never say never to the idea. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Dom Beglashen and Dave Dodden form the live act. We're making chamber music in Mount Eden, and there's a sonic tonic dedicated to eyes. Because they have it, really.
When the current government decided to invest millions and millions of dollars in the fees-free policy, that the universities were not too happy about that. They would much rather have seen that money go to supporting their research.
That's Lately with Karen Hay on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Long fine spells and isolated showers. Some heavy showers about the ranges from Bay of Plenty to Wairarapa this afternoon and early evening. Portowhenua to Wellington, fine but cloud increasing this evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered showers, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail inland, easing this evening, fine tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine apart from scattered showers this afternoon and evening, mainly inland. Bulla to Fiordland, cloudy periods and a few showers, heavy rain developing south of the glaciers tomorrow. Otago and Southland, fine today, high cloud increasing tomorrow, then rain spreading slowly northwards from tomorrow afternoon. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods but becoming fine this evening. It's 5:05 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks very much, Katrina. Lots to come on the program tonight. Soon we will be getting reports out of the USA on Jacinda Ardern's speech to the United Nations General Assembly, as well as what's been described as a dramatic day of testimony. This, of course, is the Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, being grilled by senators, members of the US Congress, regarding whether he can be fit to rule on the Supreme Court after those sexual assault allegations. But first, we start tonight at Mount Ruapehu with revelations that following the death of an 11-year-old girl in a crash 2 months ago, the bus operator's ageing shuttle bus fleet is now being replaced. Ruapehu Alpine Lifts has acknowledged that buses older than 10 years are not suitable for the mountain, and neither are two-wheel drives. This comes as a former RAL bus driver says two-wheel drives should never have been used as passenger shuttles. Exactly 2 months ago today, on Saturday, July the 28th, a two-wheel drive, 14-year-old bus carrying 31 people flipped onto its side, coming down Mount Ruapehu. First responders have described carnage on arrival, the road covered in glass and metal, people bloodied and with broken bones. Tragically, the crash took the life of 11-year-old Hannah Francis. Early reports were that the bus's brakes failed, and here on Checkpoint we reported that the bus in question had previously failed its certificate of fitness 9 times. But the bus operator, Ruapehu Alpine Lifts, or RAL, which also runs the Turoa and Whakapapa ski fields, has been silent since then, and its bus fleet has disappeared. So where are the buses that are now being retired, and what happened in the crash? Here's Zach Fleming and our cameraman Nick Monroe.
These buses should be carting skiers and snowboarders up Mount Ruapehu. They are, or more accurately were, part of Ruapehu Alpine Lift's free shuttle bus service, which cost the company $850,000 a year. Now they sit in RAL's yard while the police investigate the company over a fatal bus crash that killed a young girl from Auckland. The bus came careening around this corner halfway down Ohakuni Mountain Road, carrying 31 people. It had no working brakes, and the driver, in an attempt to slow it down, smashed into the barrier arms. But unfortunately, he lost control, and the bus ended up here on its side. You can still see the damage on the road and the blue markings from the police investigation. And exactly 2 months on, there are still tributes here to 11-year-old Hannah Francis, who tragically lost her life. And if this teddy bear and these flowers symbolise a refusal to forget what happened here, they also symbolise a want to know the why. Why weren't the bus's brakes working? A Mitsubishi Fuso, the bus was imported from Japan in 2004 and had failed its COF certificate of fitness 9 times. And from speaking to former RAL staff, that's not extraordinary for the company's fleet.
Most of the exhaust brakes didn't work on the two-wheel drive buses. Often the handbrakes didn't work, sometimes the horns didn't work. I mean, they weren't up to COF standard most of the time I was driving them.
Lucy Conway drove for RAL in 2011 and 2012, so things could have improved in the 6 years since. But Lucy is filling the void created by RAL's silence. The company's hidden behind the police investigation for 2 months now, defending its maintenance policies and fleet in the days immediately after the crash. It has since then unwaveringly used the investigation as an excuse to not answer follow-up questions. So here's Lucy filling that void.
They tried. The mechanics that were there when I was there, they tried constantly to fix the exhaust brakes, but nobody could. I don't think two-wheel drive Japanese import buses are suitable for that road, quite frankly, and that's basically why I left. It was just too scary.
And RAL seems to now agree with Lucy. In an email to shareholders last night ahead of its AGM tomorrow, the board's chair, Murray Gribbins, said lessons learned after the accident have seen the company retire all of its buses that are older than 10 years. RAL has ordered 6 new 4-wheel drive buses, which are expected to arrive next month as replacements. Back to Lucy. 6 years passed without major incident after she stopped driving for RAL, so she went 6 years without a need to talk to reporters. But she says RAL CEO Ross Copeland's response to the crash was her catalyst.
The reason that I spoke out first was because I saw Mr. Copeland on TV talking about how their buses were well serviced, well maintained, checked daily, but where are they now? They've all disappeared. There's no buses.
Around 30 centimetres of snow's fallen at Ruapehu since Wednesday, and when Checkpoint visited, there was snow at the bottom of Whakapapa village. A fresh dumping of snow like this is pretty uncommon here at Whakapapa for late September, but that's exactly what's happened here this spring. Yet on the road up to the ski field today there are no Ruapehu Alpine Lift buses to be seen. The only buses we have seen ferrying skiers and snowboarders up the mountain have been from competitors. So the 2 buses at the RAL yard just outside of Ohakuni, why are these here? Well, all of RAL's fleet was taken offline immediately after the crash, pending mechanical checks by the NZTA and the police, to see which ones were safe to keep going up and down the mountain. And any that weren't pink stickered should still be allowed to be running. But RAL say they voluntarily took their entire fleet offline pending the result of the final police investigation. So are these mechanically unsafe, or have they just been voluntarily taken off the road? We understand that one of them is for sale at the moment, but overarchingly we're left with far more questions than answers here. So we tried to go to the man who has the answers, Ross Copeland, the Chief Executive of RAL. Tried being the operative word here. None of the RAL employees that Checkpoint spoke to apparently knew his schedule. Not even RAL's commercial manager, Cesar Piotto, who I ran into outside the company's Taupo office.
G'day, Zach. Ross? He's not quite here at the moment. Was he expecting you guys?
No, he wasn't.
No, so he's not in the office.
Okay. Do you know what time he's going to be in?
Don't, sorry, mate.
Mr. Copeland won't answer Checkpoint's calls. The public relations firm RAL has hired to deal with media has said it's difficult to track him down. But through that PR firm, he has repeatedly refused to be interviewed, and so has RAL Board Chair Murray Gribben. The police won't comment on the investigation other than to say it's ongoing. Ruapehu District Council doesn't believe the road played a part in the crash. Chief Executive Clive Manley says the council's roading managers have been assisting police.
The actual road itself was upgraded a couple of years ago, so we're reasonably confident that it wasn't a fault in the road that contributed to it.
Which leaves the driver and the bus. And because RAL won't comment, here's that void being filled again, this time by Mr Manley.
Hindsight's a really good thing to focus your mind. It's terrible for the family involved, so there's no good side to an accident. However, it does make us look with a lot sharper mind of things you can do. Some of those older buses, are they the best ones for that environment? And that's what is being looked at the moment. What kind of buses should be the ones?
And RAL clearly now believes that 14-year-old two-wheel drive buses, like the one that 11-year-old Hannah Francis died riding while on a family ski trip, aren't the right ones. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
It's right on 16 minutes past 5. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has used her first speech to the United Nations General Assembly to challenge Donald Trump's worldview, although she won't admit it. The US President's address this week rejected globalism, indicating his administration would continue its path away from international cooperation, rejecting bodies like the International Criminal Court and the Paris Agreement. But Jacinda Ardern took the opportunity today to warn about the consequences of shunning these international institutions, a direct and stark contrast to the US President. Our Deputy Political Editor Chris Bramwell is at the UN headquarters in New York and filed this report.
I have great pleasure in welcoming the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Her Excellency Jacinda Ardern.
Jacinda Ardern carried with her an orator's comb gifted to her by Ngāti Rehia as she gave her first speech in the United Nations General Assembly. She delivered a sound performance and drew rare applause at one point when she spoke about the need for gender equality.
It seems surprising that in this modern age we have to recommit ourselves to gender equality, but we do. And I, for one, will never celebrate the gains we have made for women domestically, while internationally other women and girls experience a lack of the most basic opportunities and dignity. Me Too must become We Too. We are all in this together.
The Prime Minister's speech couldn't have been more of a contrast to the US President's address, which rejected globalism and highlighted his administration's domestic accomplishments. Jacinda Ardern emphasised the need for international cooperation to tackle global issues, backing the rules-based system, and using the word that's been heard a lot at the UN this week, multilateralism. She spoke of the impact climate change was having in the Pacific and pushed for countries to adhere to the Paris Climate Agreement, which the US has withdrawn from.
If my Pacific neighbours do not have the option of opting out of the effects of climate change, why should we be able to opt out of taking action to stop it? Any disintegration of multilateralism, any undermining of climate-related targets and agreements aren't interesting footnotes in geopolitical history. They are catastrophic.
Ms Ardern's partner Clark Gayford and daughter Neve watched her speak from the side of the main floor. When the Prime Minister was about a third of the way through her speech, Neve started crying and Mr Gayford whisked her away, later returning with her settled in his arms. Jacinda Ardern has made history this week by becoming the first female head of state to attend the UN General Assembly with her infant. So was it off-putting to hear her daughter cry?
I did. No, I did hear her, but you didn't notice it throw me off my game, did you? No, I did hear her, but no, it didn't move.
Jacinda Ardern would not say whether her speech was in any way a response to Donald Trump's address, but she did concede that much of it did counter his views.
Oh, that's simply because New Zealand takes a unique view. We have a unique perspective and we've had that for a long time.
She was asked whether it was a deliberate strategy that she hadn't used the US President's name all week.
Oh, I'm here to represent New Zealand. It's not all about one other leader.
Do you like Donald Trump?
Oh, look, I don't know Donald Trump. I know the President of the United States.
Do you like President of the United States?
Look, I don't think that anyone comes to the United Nations for a popularity contest. We come here to present our nation's views, and I hope I've done that.
Is that a yes or a no?
It's an irrelevant question.
Jacinda Ardern has walked a very careful line with her approach to any questions about her position on Donald Trump and his administration the entire time she's been in the United States. But as with any of these kinds of discussions in politics, it's more about what was not said than what was. In New York for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
At 5:20, we're staying in the USA. Powerful, honest and riveting. That was the US President Donald Trump's Twitter verdict on the testimony given by his Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh today during a dramatic day on Capitol Hill. Mr Kavanaugh angrily and at times tearfully denied an accusation of sexual assault. Earlier, his accuser, Christine Blasey Ford, testified that she had feared for her life as Mr Kavanaugh attacked her at a high school party. The BBC's John Sopel filed this report from Washington.
Judgment Day has arrived for the judge. It's hard to overstate the passions, the conspiracy theories, the mistrust and division this Supreme Court appointment has stirred. Christine Blasey Ford set out her case, nervously at first.
I am here today not because I want to be. I am terrified. I am here because I believe it is my civic duty to tell you what happened to me while Brett Kavanaugh and I were in high school.
And then the distressing detail of what she said happened that night.
I was pushed onto the bed and Brett got on top of me. He began running his hands over my body and grinding into me. I yelled, hoping that someone downstairs might hear me, and I tried to get away from him, but his weight was heavy. Brett groped me and tried to take off my clothes. He had a hard time because he was very inebriated and because I was wearing a one-piece bathing suit underneath my clothing. I believed he was going to rape me. I tried to yell for help. When I did, Brett put his hand over my mouth to stop me from yelling. This is what terrified me the most and has had the most lasting impact on my life.
She then spoke of the toll this has taken since going public.
My family and I have been the target of constant harassment and death threats, and I have been called the most vile and hateful names imaginable.
Then it was time for questions.
What is the strongest memory you have?
The laughter, the uproarious laughter between the two, and they're having fun at my expense.
Brett Kavanaugh has said he's a victim of mistaken identity. In his opening statement, he came out swinging, his voice straining, sounding alternately indignant.
My family and my name have been totally and permanently destroyed. You may defeat me in the final vote, but you'll never get me to quit. Never. I'm here today to tell the truth. I've never sexually assaulted anyone. Not in high school, not in college, not ever.
And finally, emotional.
The other night, Ashley and my daughter Liza said prayers. And little Liza, all of 10 years old, said to Ashley, we should pray for the woman. It's a lot of wisdom from a 10-year-old.
His fury was plain as he answered questions about some of the other women who've made accusations against him.
You know, we hear from the witnesses, but the FBI isn't interviewing them and isn't giving us any facts. So all we have...
You're interviewing me. You're interviewing me. You're doing it, Senator. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're doing it. There's no conclusions reached.
And what you're saying, if I understand it, is that the allegations by Dr. Ford, Ms. Ramirez, and Ms. Swetnick are wrong.
Yeah, that is emphatically what I'm saying.
Donald Trump flew back into Washington today, every TV on Air Force One tuned to the hearing. He's watching, as is the rest of America, and the raw emotion has been mesmerising. And then, the near impossible question senators need to answer. Who do you believe?
John Sopel there, and the Judiciary Committee plans to vote tomorrow on Mr Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. We will have more after 6 on that. It's just right on 24 minutes past 5 to Dunedin now, where University of Otago students today put down their study notes and picked up placards to protest their proctor. Dave Scott is under fire for unlawfully entering a student flat and confiscating bongs. This is while a resident was asleep upstairs. More than 400 protesters marched through the city this afternoon as more claims surfaced that Mr Scott had entered other flats without permission. Our Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton was there.
Dave Scott, you've got mail. Steal our bongs and go to jail. Dave Scott, you've got
Exams may be looming for University of Otago students, but pens were down as they marched for their rights. In a bombshell earlier this week, Proctor Dave Scott, a former police officer, admitted he entered an unlocked flat and took 3 bongs. He says he's also confiscated bongs from students' backyards. Darren Harvey is one of the protesters taking a stand against the proctor, despite not starting uni until next year.
I kind of don't like the idea of a proctor at a university I'm going to having carte blanche to go onto my property and take anything of mine regardless of what it is. It's absurd to me.
The Students' Association Recreation Officer John Smith says it's an unacceptable pattern of behaviour that has to stop. He led the protesters through the university with a large papier-mâché bong in tow to the proctor's office. An unexpected entrance by Mr Scott brought cheers and jeers from the protesters. People crowded forward as the megaphone was lifted for him to speak.
I hear you and I see you. I gave an apology on Tuesday and I'm happy to repeat that apology.
Yo! Let the man speak!
I've learnt from this era and I give an assurance that it won't be repeated. I thank you for raising this with me and I acknowledge your right to protest. Thanks very much.
Mr Smith says while students originally wanted him kicked out, they've chosen to work with him.
We've chosen to forgive him. We realise that it's more powerful to work with a proctor that is humble and knows the power of this community than to have someone new, completely fresh come in and have to learn that all over again. And Dave, has apologised and he's been dragged through the media, he's been dragged through a lot. We realise that there's more power in forgiveness than vengeance.
Instead, students demanded a code of conduct for the proctor and Campus Watch to curb their power.
Well, there's 3 points. Please don't come into our flats uninvited unless it's an emergency. Please don't take our property and treat us as equals within the community because we don't feel we've necessarily been treated as equals because of the actions he's taken.
Third-year student Bailey Poole says students needed to be treated as adults, not naughty kids, and they deserved respect.
There's no line between where his jurisdiction is off campus, and I think that's why we're here, to define that and set those boundaries that we need, because you can't just have people walking into houses as they please.
Vice-Chancellor Harleen Haynes says the proctor's powers are already well defined by existing policy and law. The university says it's open to meeting with students to discuss their concerns. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton Tane.
And that's not just an audio report. You can check out the video and the footage there that Tess took on our Facebook page as well as our website. It's 27 minutes past 5. 47 people have had a lucky escape after a plane crashed into the sea in Micronesia. The Air Niugini Boeing 737 was coming into land on the tiny island of Chuuk, where it appeared to miss the runway and come to rest in the lagoon about 150 metres from the runway. A flotilla of boats rescued all 36 passengers and 11 crew. Bill Janes was a passenger and in an interview on the Pacific Daily News website says he had to wade through waist-deep water.
We landed hard until I looked over and saw a hole in the side of the plane and water was coming in. And I thought, well, this is not the way it's supposed to happen. And we came in low. We came in very low.
Giff Johnson is a journalist based in the Marshall Islands and he has the very latest.
The plane has actually is totally submerged in the lagoon. Apparently there were 36 passengers and 11 crew members, and they were able to get all of them off the plane safely after this landing, which apparently started, they did hit the runway, but my understanding is that the landing was very far down the runway, not at the beginning of the runway. And in many of the islands up here in the north, Chuuk, Koshrai, Pohnpei, and so on, the runways are relatively short. And short means when you get to the end of the runway, you step off into water. So apparently the plane shot off into the lagoon. And according to reports from Chuuk, it's actually about 150 meters away from the end of the runway in the lagoon. Now, as I say, it's sunk or it's submerged, and that's pretty much the state of play at the moment.
Right, Giff, and what we saw in that footage that was shared online is that lots of locals in their boats were out there picking the people up and shipping them back to land, to that atoll. So I guess they were pretty crucial in the whole rescue mission.
It looks like people responded instantly. And one of the things about the location of the airport in Chuuk, the international airport in Waino, is it's actually right adjacent to the town, which is the capital of the Chuuk State in the Federated States of Micronesia. So, I mean, essentially you land and you're in the town. So people obviously saw it. Everybody ran for their boats, and within minutes there was a whole flotilla out. And the video and photos that I saw indicated that there were certainly enough boats to get the nearly 50 passengers and crew off. I guess the main issue was to get them out of the cabin before the plane sank, or because it was. It did stay up on the water for a bit. I don't know how long it actually stayed up before it submerged, but they, according to officials in Chuuk, they were successful in getting them off the plane, and people were taken to the hospital nearby to be checked. But they're saying that they're reporting no serious injuries, which is quite amazing, given the situation.
Yeah, quite amazing, because in that footage you can see the boat's quite close to the plane, and by that stage a good part of the plane is submerged, so things must have been fairly touch and go there. You told us a bit earlier that your information was that the plane had landed a fair way down what is already a short runway. We know that Air New Guinea executives have been in a crisis meeting this afternoon. Have you heard anything else back from them? Obviously an investigation is going to be underway, but is it too early to know what are the possible causes?
Yeah, the people that we've talked to in Chuuk said it was raining earlier today, so the conditions may not have been, perfect for a landing. And this is certainly not the first time that planes have run off runways in the Micronesia area. Several years back, an Asia Pacific Airlines flight, which handles cargo, ships tuna and mail in and out of the islands, they had a problem with a landing in Pohnpei and ran off the runway and ended up with the nose of the plane in the lagoon. And, there have been things like that. And part of the reason is just the runways are short. So there is very little margin for error on a pilot. If it is the pilot's fault, or anyway, whatever the conditions are, you need to land right at the beginning of the runway to have the safety, be able to make a safe landing.
Gift Johnson in Margero. Great to see everyone was rescued from that crash. The photos, if you want to go and look at it again on our Facebook page or our website, looked a bit like the landing on the Hudson River, where again everyone was thankfully rescued. Coming up before 6 on Checkpoint, the Racing Minister is calling for a revamp of the harness racing industry. There's been a jump in the number of Auckland Council staff receiving six-figure salaries, and we hit the streets of Petone with a police checkpoint. We'd also love your feedback. You can always get in touch anytime throughout the program. 2101 is the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook as well, or send us an email, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. But first, Katrina Batten with the news headlines.
Questions are being raised about the independence of a police investigation into the second Pike River mine explosion. The families of the 29 men killed released a video this week, which they say shows the explosion was caused by a conveyor belt being switched on. The police say they can find no evidence this was authorised, but they've now launched an investigation to make sure their actions did not cause the second explosion. Family spokesperson Bernie Monk says the police cannot investigate themselves and an independent probe is needed. All 47 passengers and crew on board an Air New Guinea plane that came down in a lagoon in Micronesia have been rescued. The 737 jet is reported to have landed in a lagoon about 100 metres short of the runway at Chuuk International Airport. A flotilla of small boats raced out to rescue those on board before the stricken plane sank. The fate of the United States President's nominee for the Supreme Court is expected to be decided by a Senate Judicial Committee vote overnight. Brett Kavanaugh angrily denied an accusation of sexual assault when he appeared before the committee today. His accuser, Christine Blasey Ford, had earlier told senators Mr Kavanaugh attempted to rape her during a high school party. The police have launched an internal investigation into their use of outside security consultants for surveillance, including Thompson & Clark. An inquiry which the State Services Commissioner launched earlier this year into the use of outside security consultants exempted the police. However, the Police Commissioner, Mike Bush, says it's important police actions are also open to investigation. Protesting Otago University students say they have chosen to forgive the university proctor who entered student flats without permission and confiscated drug paraphernalia. Dave Scott, a former police officer, admitted he entered a flat while a resident was asleep upstairs. More than 400 students who protested this afternoon first demanded his resignation, but then called instead for a new code of conduct for the proctor and campus staff. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6.
Thank you very much, Katrina. Nona Peltier is here for the business news. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
The super fund beat expectations again.
They did. Yes, they got a 12% return on their investment this year. That's pretty darn good. And that boosted the fund by $4 billion to $39 billion. Of course, that was helped a little bit by the government's contribution of $500 million because they've resumed, they've resumed their contributions to the super fund. So good news there. And that's our long-term pension fund, of course. So that's a good thing.
And not just good news for them, but also for the tech industry.
That's right. The tech industry are going to be putting out a comprehensive report, but they gave us a bit of a taste of what's in it. And what they've said is that their underlying profit for the industry rose 38% in the past year to $1.16 billion. And that was from $842 million the year before. That's good news for the sector because we've often heard that it's not very profitable, but it's the third largest industry in New Zealand. And I think it's a good news story for people who are invested in that and certainly wanting to develop it.
Great. Yeah. Have you got an update on the markets for us?
I do. I have to say that our market really had a bit of a tick up this afternoon. Rose more than 2/3%. That's the NZX Top 50, up 65 points to 9,351 on a day of records because the Nikkei, that's the Japanese market, it rose to a highest level since November 1991.
Whoa.
And the U.S. dollar is also at quite a high point, a 9-month high, the highest it's been this year, I guess, against the yen. And that saw our currency go down a little bit, 66 U.S. cents, 91.5 Australian and 50.5 pence.
Good news all round for everyone. That's very uplifting.
Except unless, of course, you're wanting to go on a holiday with the Kiwi.
True.
Yeah.
We know some people here have just gone away on a holiday. Oh well, bad timing. School holidays. Thanks very much, Nona Peltier. The latest with the business news at 5:37. Trampers will be able to access American TV star Matt Lauer's Hunter Valley station more easily after a new agreement. Lauer bought the lease for $13 million last year, and since then trampers have complained about not being allowed to travel across the station to the Hawea Conservation Park. Now Lauer's company has agreed to allow up to 6 4-wheel drives a day on the land. This is between December and April, but they have to pay $35. In July, Matt Lauer told Checkpoint there was no problem with access. His lawyer, Graham Todd, insists that's always been the case.
Well, the access that is set out in the agreement that we've signed with the Department of Conservation is exactly what we've been providing since my client purchased the property and took ownership in March 2017. So what we've done in terms of the agreement is just spell it out for everybody. What is the access that we're willing to be agreed to provide in terms of the Overseas Investment Office conditions, which we've had to comply with anyway, and the access that we've agreed in addition to that to provide. Walking Access Commission made an application to the Commissioner of Crown Lands for a public easement through the property, and they sought 100 vehicle movements per month. We've potentially allowed for 180 vehicle movements per month by limiting it to 6 vehicles per day. And the reason for that limitation is simply so that the amenity that people enjoy in there, the trampers and the fishermen, doesn't get destroyed. by too many vehicles being on the property at one time.
OK, so we're just going to clarify, of course, that that's between December and April, and of course that's obviously the period of the year, the season where you'd think there'd be more trampers and people in four-wheel drives wanting access. So now it's up to 6 four-wheel drive vehicles a day. They have to pay $35 each too, and that obviously goes towards the maintenance of the interior roads there. So what was the situation before we had this big dispute? Was it up to 6 vehicles a day, or was it something else?
Well, look, I can't speak for what was going on before we purchased the property, but since we took over the property, we have allowed, for those people that have requested access through there, that access has been granted. In fact, we have never had, nor has DOC or Walking Access Commission, Federated Mountain Clubs, or anybody been able to tell us one person who has been ever denied access to Hunter Valley Station. Now, that's the facts of the matter, and I specifically asked those organisations to put me in touch with people who had been denied access, and they couldn't tell me one person. So what we've done is, yes, you're right, we've asked for a $35 fee towards the maintenance of the track. The maintenance for this year, so you know, was in excess of $50,000 to maintain this track, and that has only primarily been for farming and fishermen's access. The track crosses a number of creeks before it actually gets to the Hunter River, and often those creeks are washed out numerous times a year, and they affect the track.
So what are you spending $50,000 on? Is it workers to come in and actually fix the track and connect it all back up again over the river?
Maintain the track, and the access to and the exits from the creek, where the creeks where they have to be forded.
And of course, this isn't your the property of your client is not just a walkthrough. It's a station, it's a farm. There's movement of stock, and I think according to this agreement, there will not be access in the lambing season. That's pretty much coming up now, isn't it? Between October and December, just so people are aware, they cannot access at all this property during that fairly broad window. Obviously, for the sake of the stock and the business that's going on the property.
Well, such conditions are not unusual. For example, the Mount Roy track near Wanaka is closing this weekend for lambing season. So that's just one of the things that people tend to accept when we're talking about, like you say, access through a private high country station. And this is accentuated in this particular situation with Hunter Valley Station. It has the longest lake frontage and river frontage in New Zealand. It's some 46 kilometres from the homestead to the top of the station, to the Hardware Conservation Park, and that's a 4.5-hour drive each way. So this is not a track where you go for just a Sunday afternoon drive. This is a serious drive.
That's Graham Todd, Matt Lauer's lawyer, after the deal was struck with the Department of Conservation. In his words, clarifying arrangements around access to Hunter Valley Station. It's, coming up to 17 minutes to 6, let's say. The Deputy Prime Minister, Winston Peters, has labelled harness racing an old man's sport, which he says needs younger people and women to make it great again. Make harness racing great again. The sport's been plagued with problems since race-fixing charges hit high-profile members of the industry, and a recent report found it to be in a state of serious malaise. Speaking at the annual harness racing conference in Auckland, Mr Peters, who's also the racing minister, called for dramatic change. Jesse Chang was there and filed this report, which starts with Mr Peters' speech.
I don't want to be too critical, but it's become a bit of an old man's sport when you need a whole lot of women and a whole lot of young people in the game as well. And so I can see an enormous opportunity in this country if we can but get syndication going, and really quickly across this country, and get out to get young people involved.
In a room full of older men, Winston Peters' criticisms about needing more women and young people in harness racing hit home. A previous speaker had called it a dark period for the industry after the scathing Masara report recommended the number of tracks in the country to be almost halved. It also recommended outsourcing the TAB's commercial activities to an international operator. Recent arrests and charges of race fixing, which shocked the country, haven't helped either. Mr Peters didn't hold back when saying things needed to change, and now.
It's no time, Mr Chairman, for old men, so to speak, to stand around scratching their backsides when something has to be done, and done real now, and real fast. The industry has declined in foal crops, pressure from breeders, owners and trainers to increase the prize money, a lack of funding sources, the profitability and sustainability of race clubs is all in question, and deteriorating facility infrastructure and investment.
Submissions on the Masara report close on the 19th of October, but Mr Peters says he'll be taking papers about harness racing reforms to Cabinet nearly 2 weeks before that. He dismissed suggestions that didn't allow for proper consultation.
The papers aren't based on the consultation, they're based on the pathway forward, so that people know that we've got a plan to reform this industry.
The Chief Executive of Harness Racing New Zealand, Edward Rennell, says he's confident the industry will be listened to.
We're looking to put forward a constructive submission in conjunction, in talking as well to the other codes, so that we try and get a collective industry position. So I think the process of going to Cabinet first, I think, is just to try and speed up the progress with some of the recommendations that are in the report.
But questions from harness racing members highlighted concerns that the recommendations from the report would be rushed. Winston Peters also announced the Racing Amendment Bill, known as the Racefields legislation, had been scrapped. The amendments had included introducing new requirements for offshore betting operators. The Chief Executive of the New Zealand Racing Board, John Allen, says the new law would have brought in $1 million a month. He says the announcement is disappointing.
That's money, as the Minister says, we need. So it is a disappointment to find that that's been withdrawn. I wasn't aware that that was the outcome.
John Allen says the Masara report has sparked a lot of conversation, and there's no doubt there will be a lot more discussion about it as the conference continues. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jesse Chang tēnei.
From harness racing to the rodeo, the New Zealand Rodeo Cowboys Association is changing some of its practices to address animal welfare concerns after an outpouring of public concern last season. The rodeo season starts again with its first meeting at Labour weekend. Now, earlier this year, the Animal Law Association, this is a coalition of lawyers working to improve the welfare and lives of animals, sent a report to the government which said the Code of Welfare was flimsy, outdated and illegal. Now, the then Associate Minister of Agriculture, Meka Whaitiri, refused to ban rodeos and was due to look at ways to improve conditions for the animals. But in the meantime, Lyle Cox of the New Zealand Rodeo Cowboys Association says critics of his industry are extremists, and he's going ahead with his own changes.
We're doing our own reviews. We implemented some significant changes at the annual general meeting earlier this year for this season, and some of the events we're continually working on how we can, reduce the risk of any harm to human or the people taking part or the animals that are competing in rodeos.
So Lyle, can I ask you, Lyle, are your events safe?
Yes, they're safe. We do get, like any sporting event, sometimes the people do get injured. Riders and that falling off, but generally it's pretty safe.
Are they safe for the animals involved?
Yes, if you look at our statistics, we have very few accidents. Like any sport involving animals, equestrian sports, there are regrettably sometimes accidents, but we kept a lot of statistics last year. We've put them through to MPI. Very few accidents, most of them some minor injuries, but in general we came through very good.
So you're talking about accidents there, and you talk about riders, and then I asked you about animals. So if everything's safe, why did you review your animal welfare?
Some of the things are just to make the competition better. Some are around the type of event, the type of people who can compete, more events for females, younger people.
Yet, Lyle, you seem to have taken the front foot forward here, because there's the release that's coming out, and you said you're going to change 4 things, and I've got them here, and it seems to be all around improving the training and the competence of people that are in the event. You are limiting one legal catch. This is in the rope and tie events. There's only one permitted run to catch an animal, so the animal can't be chased around the arena, and then you've got a rule about how much a participant can weigh when they're riding on a calf. So why have you come up with those 4 points, which seem to be fairly paltry in terms of what NAWAC and other organisations are asking for you to do around the cruelty, what they allege to be the cruelty to animals? Why the move for these 4 rules?
Who's alleging cruelty? Be very careful here, because cruelty is a criminal offence. No one's, no NAWAC or MPI have never accused us of cruelty.
Well, there's a report that came out earlier this year that said rodeos are illegal and they must be banned. That's from the Animal Law Association, and they've listed quite a number of things that they allege that you do.
That's not NAWAC or MPI. We're not dealing with extremist groups or people out there who've got the, other views. We're dealing with the government, NAWAC, the government's National Animal Welfare Committee.
Well, this was a report that was submitted to the former Associate Minister. Lyle, this was a report that was submitted to the former Associate Minister, Meka Whaitiri, that wanted to look into this. She's received the report. She didn't confirm before she left that ministry that whether she had read it, but it lists a number of things that are commonly done, and maybe I can run through some of them with you and see whether you've ruled them in or ruled them out of this upcoming season. Electric prods, are they in or out?
Electric prods in quite a few of the animal welfare codes, not just rodeo, are enabled, but we minimise the use of them.
Flank straps?
Yeah, flank straps are in. Flank straps, if you understand what a flank strap is, and I can send you the explanation, it's a piece of the harness used in rodeo competition. The minister wouldn't...
What does a flank strap do, Lyle? Just so we can understand as we go through these things, what does a flank strap do?
Flank strap is a piece of harness that's on a bucking horse to encourage them to buck high and straight.
And how does it do that? How does it encourage them?
Hang on. You wanted to know. It's padded with sheepskin. It's not tight. It's just firm, and it works on a pressure release type thing. So as it kicks out, there's less pressure and it comes down. Now, and the flank comes off as soon as the 8 seconds is over.
What about a tail twist?
It's no different than other harness used in other events. And, on pacing horses, they've got traces to make sure they pace, which is an unnatural movement. But it's no different than any other harness equipment used in equestrian events.
All right, I'll just run through a couple of others. Tail twisting, what's that?
That's illegal.
That's illegal?
Yep.
And so that's ruled out?
Yep.
Rope burning?
Well, we don't have that happening, but if it's rope burning, if you're working with animals anywhere, it could be on a dog or it could be on a calf or it could be on a horse. If the rope burns the animal, that's rope burn.
In the meantime, you're happy to allow for the use of electric prods, flank straps and spurs and ropes being thrown around young calves' necks and young cows being slammed onto the ground. That came out of the report, but it sounds like you're quite happy for that scenario to be played out.
That's not what happens. That's not what happens.
Well, you've agreed to electric prods, you've agreed to flank straps.
Come to a rodeo with me, Alex, and I'll show you. I'll invite you to come to a rodeo and we'll go through it.
I might take you up.
That doesn't happen. Heck, I said to you before, electric prodders, they are legal, but we don't like using them. And I'm encouraging or working with the clubs throughout New Zealand to ensure that if they are used, they're used as per the rules, but to a minimum standard. We don't throw cattle beasts to the ground and all that sort of thing, slam them to the ground, all very emotive talk by a few people out there. It doesn't matter what we do, they will still protest against the sport. But it's not just restricted to rodeos. These people don't want animals used for anything, a lot of them, and whether it be sport or food or other type things. They harass people involved in rodeo. They harass our communities, our supporters, by social media. They can do it from a distance. If I did it to your children and that, you wouldn't tolerate it. But there's no difference. It's just total social media harassment and bullying.
Have you gone to the authorities about that?
Yes, we have, but it's very difficult. You look at going through SafeNet and the police. It's quite a difficult process, but in the meantime, it just carries on.
Lyle Cox there, and to let you know, we do plan to take up his invitation and attend a rodeo, so do keep an eye out for that. It's coming up to 6 minutes to 6. Rachel McGregor has faced questions in court from her former boss Colin Craig as the pair sue each other for defamation. Mr Craig is representing himself in the proceedings, so it was up to him, rather than a lawyer, to cross-examine his former press secretary, who had laid a sexual harassment complaint against him. Our reporter Sarah Robson was at the High Court in Auckland.
Rachel McGregor opted to stand in the witness box as she was cross-examined by Colin Craig. As she gave evidence, she turned her body away from him and mostly faced the front of the courtroom. She rarely made contact with Mr Craig, her former boss, as he asked her about her work experience and how she ended up taking a job with the Conservative Party in 2011. Mr Craig asked Ms McGregor if she accepted that at the time her values aligned with those of the party.
Yeah, it sounded like you seemed like a great person, but of course you hadn't actually released any policies at that point, so I can't comment on whether my values aligned with your policies because you didn't have any.
Colin Craig continued to press Rachel McGregor on whether she had looked at the Conservative Party's founding principles on its website. She had told Mr Craig that the website and the party's communication channels needed work and that she could help, but she admitted she didn't look at the principles.
I had no interest, to be frank, in the political side of this. I was looking for a part-time job. You'd been recommended to me by my former, guy who'd just done this internship with me, and I didn't look at your principles because, to be frank, I didn't care. I just wanted to get a job.
Colin Craig is suing Rachel McGregor over statements she made to the co-founder of the Taxpayers Union, Jordan Williams, and in a media statement and tweet. Ms McGregor has responded with a counterclaim over what Mr Craig said to media and Conservative Party members. Earlier, Ms McGregor told the court she never expected a sexual harassment claim she made against Mr Craig would become a public scandal. After the pair reached a confidential settlement over her sexual harassment claim and a financial dispute, Ms McGregor said she wanted to move on, rebuild her career and forget she had ever worked for Mr Craig. And she said she was not the source of the attacks against Mr Craig's reputation.
I have neither sought media attention nor fuelled speculation. I did not tell any Conservative Party board members about my sexual harassment claim. I did not talk to any journalists about my claim. I did everything I could to keep the information about my claim confidential and private.
Rachel McGregor said that Colin Craig's comments to the media about the sexual harassment claim and his repeated breaches of the confidential settlement have left her hurt and humiliated. She said some of his comments had also depicted her as a liar and a party to a dirty politics conspiracy.
Defamation of me has been comprehensive, conducted in the most public way possible, and carefully planned and choreographed.
The case before Justice Hinton continues next week. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Sarah Robson, aho.
3.5 minutes to 6. A new 35 square metre shipping container has been transformed into a completely off-the-grid commercial kitchen aimed at feeding hungry school children and teaching people how to grow and cook homemade foods. The new kitchen is part of the Common Unity project in Lower Hutt. This is a charity that repurposes, reuses and recycles local goods for the well-being of the community. The produce will come from nearby Rimutaka prison and the kitchen will be completely run by volunteers. Emma Hatton went for a visit.
It looks like a plain black shipping container from the outside, but the new kitchen is worth $250,000. It's completely off the grid, relying on solar energy and rainwater. Founder Julia Milne says sustainability and minimising waste is key, right down to the construction of the kitchen, designed by architect Kelly O'Neill.
We didn't just want to have a shipping container with a few solar panels banged on top, and the construction of it was just as important as the outcome. So there's beautiful insulation in this. Kelly hasn't used any glues. So there's a tank system going in the back, so we'll collect off our remakery roof.
She says the new kitchen is a hub where people can bring extra food, share food and cook together.
Not only all of the amazing kai that we're growing with our Urban Kai Farms project, but also looking at all of the food that is available across the Hutt Valley, be it food rescue, be it the surpluses that people are growing in their backyards, the incredible amount of abundance that is produced from our local fruit trees, because we've kind of forgotten all of this.
The kitchen will initially make 200 meals each day. Half will go for free to local schools and the other half will be for sale.
There are parents that can afford and families that can afford food, but they're really time pressured. So we will sell those meals just using what it is that we are growing and making. We can sell them for $6 each, and that for every meal we sell, we can give at least another meal away.
The project, which kicks off on Wednesday, has given head chef Pravina Kumari a new lease on life.
Well, I was actually unemployed, and work and income has got
me into this community work. I actually fell in love with the place and people I work with and made a big difference.
Julia Milne won't say how much they've spent on the new kitchen, but says they've paid nowhere near what it's worth. The solar panels and rainwater infrastructure was covered by Transpower, while they received a substantial grant from the Lotteries Commission. She says local tradies and those doing community service work have also chipped in. The small kitchen has big dreams. Ms Milne says they hope to grow to an output of 2,500 meals a day, with plenty of teaching happening along the way. For Checkpoint, Emma Hatton.
Thanks for that, Emma. Again, you can check that out on our Facebook page, on our website. There's some photos, nice colourful photos to go with that report. There's been some feedback on the interview with Lyle Cox on the Rodeo. One texter says they're barbaric animal abuse, and another person's got in touch and says they're cruel and anachronistic. We'll try to get to a bit more of your feedback after the news, which is coming up in about 5 seconds.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batten aho. All passengers and crew on board an Air New Guinea plane survived when it crashed in a Micronesian lagoon today after landing more than 100 metres short of the runway. The Boeing 737-800 was scheduled to stop in Chuuk in the Federated States of Micronesia on its way from Pohnpei to Port Moresby. RNZ Pacific's Koroi Hawkins reports.
Airport authorities say 36 passengers and 11 crew members were rescued from the sinking plane. A survivor, Bill Janes, spoke on social media.
I thought we landed hard until I looked over and saw a hole in the side of the plane. The water was coming in, and I thought, well, this is not the way it's supposed to happen. We came in low. We came in very low.
Bill Janes had only minor head injuries, but he says others were hurt pretty badly. He says the response from the local boat owners who flocked to rescue people before the stricken plane sank was impressive. Papua New Guinea's Accident Investigation Commission says investigators will fly to the scene as soon as possible to piece together what happened. This is Koroi Hawkins.
The independence of an investigation into the second Pike River mine explosion has been called into question. Video was released this week by the families of the 29 men killed, which they say shows the explosion was caused by a conveyor belt being switched on. The police say they can find no evidence that such an act was authorised. However, they have now launched an investigation to ensure their actions did not cause the second explosion, which ended all hope of finding any of the men alive. A spokesperson for some families, Bernie Monk, says the police cannot investigate themselves and an independent agency should be put in charge. The police have been approached for comment. The United States Senate Judicial Committee is expected to vote overnight on whether to back the Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. The judge angrily denied an accusation of sexual assault in front of the committee today, hitting back at dramatic testimony from his accuser, Christine Blasey Ford. She earlier told senators Mr Kavanaugh attempted to rape her during a high school party. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham accused Democrat senators of exploiting Dr Ford and creating the most unethical sham he'd seen in his political career.
What you want to do is destroy this guy's life, hold this seat open, and hope you win in 2020. I hope the American people can see through this sham, that you knew about it and you held it. You had no intention of protecting Dr. Ford.
Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. A group of public sector bosses will now be responsible for addressing the scourge of domestic and sexual violence. Justice Under-Secretary Jan Logie has announced the new joint venture at the annual conference of the Māori Women's Welfare League in Gisborne. The board will be made up of the heads of 10 government agencies, including Oranga Tamariki, Social Development, Health, Justice and Police. They'll work with a new dedicated unit which will get advice from stakeholders, including an independent Māori advisory group. Ms Logie says it's important they all work together.
Victims as well as people who are using violence will often disclose to doctors or counsellors or teachers, social workers, and all too often at the moment when they do that and they're reaching out for help, they're not getting the help. So we need all of our government agencies to come together.
Green MP Jan Logie. Rachel McGregor has continued to be cross-examined by her former boss, Colin Craig, in his High Court case against her. The former Conservative Party leader is suing Ms McGregor for defamation, and she's pursuing a counterclaim. Mr Craig is representing himself in the proceedings. The pair had previously reached a confidential settlement over a sexual harassment claim and a financial dispute. Mr Craig asked Ms McGregor if she knew she could have talked to the chief executive of the Conservative Party about her pay issues.
No, because she wasn't actually the boss, you were.
But she made a number of hiring and firing decisions during the campaign.
I don't remember that. She may have got rid of candidates maybe, but you were the one who was in charge of, you know, hiring and firing any staff or anything. I mean, essentially, you made all the decisions actually. She was essentially just your puppet.
Rachel McGregor. The case before Justice Hinton continues next week. Protesting Otago University students say they have chosen to forgive the university proctor who entered several student flats without permission and confiscated drug paraphernalia. More than 400 students protested this afternoon over the issue. Dave Scott, a former police officer, admitted he entered one of the flats while a resident was asleep upstairs. The students first demanded his resignation, but instead called for a new code of conduct for the proctor and campus staff. Josh Smith of the University Students Association says students decided to work with him because there is more power in forgiveness than vengeance. It's 6:05. Sport. The All Blacks assistant coach Ian Foster says they try to keep their preparations the same, whether they're coming off a win or a loss, though he concedes that having some dented pride spices things up. The All Blacks are coming off a rare home defeat following their loss to South Africa in Wellington as they seek to wrap up the Rugby Championship title with a bonus point win in Argentina this weekend.
We're trying to get the same process whether we win or lose, because for us it's about the performance. Every Sunday, Monday, Tuesday we're focusing on stuff that we don't think we got quite right. Yep, it feels a bit worse after a loss, but you've got to get over that and get back into the process of, okay, what are the key things we need to do to perform better?
Ian Foster. The former All Black Tony Brown has been appointed head coach of the Japan Super Rugby side, the Sunwolves. He replaces Jamie Joseph, who stepped down to focus on coaching the Japan national team. Brown was Joseph's assistant at the Highlanders and became head coach last year when Joseph moved to Japan. The Trans-Tasman rivalry has spilled into women's cricket, with Australian women's captain Meg Lanning declaring she and her teammates will be making a statement against the New Zealand White Ferns this 2020 series after suffering 7 defeats in 9 matches. Lanning says the record is something she's keen to change starting tomorrow night when the two sides will meet at the North Sydney Oval. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the origins of personality testing and Myers-Briggs in particular. Jean-Marie Laskus, who wrote Concussion, actually, has told the story of the letters written to President Obama. 10,000 every day. Who wrote them and who read them all? And Harry Lyon, co-founder of Hello Sailor, has made his first solo album, From Lying in the Sand to the Sea, you could say. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight. Tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country and Wairarapa. Long fine spells and isolated showers, some heavy showers about the ranges from Bay of Plenty to Wairarapa this afternoon and early evening. Horowhenua to Wellington, fine but cloud increasing this evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay, scattered showers, some heavy and possibly thundery with hail inland, easing this evening, fine tomorrow. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, fine apart from scattered showers this afternoon and evening, mainly inland. Buller to Fiordland, cloudy periods and a few showers, heavy rain developing south of the glaciers tomorrow. Otago and Southland, fine today, high cloud increasing tomorrow, then rain slowly spreading northwards from tomorrow afternoon. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods but becoming fine this evening. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint. Oh, don't forget to put your clocks back.
I was just going to remind you to do that. Spring, isn't it spring forward?
No, we go back.
Okay.
We lose an hour.
We go forward. We go forward.
Yeah.
We spring forward for
Yep.
spring.
No, I'm pretty sure you're wrong. We go back.
We'll get an answer
We're
to
gaining
this.
an hour, yeah.
We want to make sure we don't...
No, we lose an hour, so we do go forward. I take it back.
No, that's good.
Sorry,
Very good.
apologise.
No, have a good weekend
You too.
and watch the fake news.
I will.
Thank you, Katrina. It's just come up to 6:09. The Prime Minister has launched an international campaign to turn Me Too into We Too. Jacinda Ardern used strong rhetoric on gender equality in her first ever speech to the UN General Assembly today. She also used the speech to champion multilateralism and said undermining climate agreements would be, quote, catastrophic. Her speech was a direct contrast to Donald Trump's earlier this week, in which he rejected globalism. He praised the achievements of his administration and indicated it would continue its path away from international cooperation. Jacinda Ardern told the Assembly everyone has choices.
The international institutions we have committed ourselves to have not been perfect, but they can be fixed. And that is why the challenge I wish to issue today is this. Together, we must rebuild and recommit to multilateralism. We must redouble our efforts to work as a global community. We must rediscover our shared belief in the value rather than the harm of connectedness. We must demonstrate that collective international action not only works, but it is in the best interests of all of us. But much of that pride has come from being a strong and active member of our international community, not in spite of it. We still have a gender pay gap, an over-representation of women in low-paid work, and domestic violence, and we are not alone. It seems surprising that in this modern age we have to recommit ourselves to gender equality, but we do. And I, for one, will never celebrate the gains we have made for women domestically, while internationally other women and girls experience a lack of the most basic opportunities and dignity. Me Too must become We Too. We are all in this together.
Jacinda Ardern there at the United Nations General Assembly in New York. We're going just slightly south of that to Washington DC now, where Brett Kavanaugh has angrily denied a university professor's accusation that he sexually assaulted her 36 years ago. This is as he fights to salvage his Supreme Court nomination. Christine Blasey Ford appeared in public for the first time to detail her allegation against Mr Kavanaugh, a conservative federal appeals court judge chosen by Donald Trump. The Supreme Court plays a vital role in US political life. Appointed for life, its 9 members have the final say on US law, including on controversial social issues such as abortion and challenges to government policy. I spoke to CNN correspondent Kristen Holmes in Washington, D.C., who says she has never had a day quite like it.
Today was one of the ugliest and most heart-wrenching days on Capitol Hill, probably of all time. We watched Christine Blasey Ford give her testimony in raw detail, and it was so clear that what she was saying was a memory, was something that had happened to her, and she was reliving it. We looked around the room, and others were crying. There were supporters there. There were other women, survivors, but it didn't change when Kavanaugh testified. Now, he was very indignant. He was at times yelling at the senators, but at times he was crying, and at times his supporters and his family members were crying as well. And here's the big fear here in Washington, is that nothing changed, that we had this day where people were pouring their hearts out, and that if you are a Democrat, you believe Dr. Ford, and if you are a Republican, you believe Judge Kavanaugh, and everything is driven by policy, agenda, and politics, and that people can't see beyond that. We had one of our senators, Republican senators here, Lindsey Graham, essentially yelling at Democrats, saying this was one of the biggest shams he'd seen since he's been a senator, saying that he knows that they're so desperate for power, he hopes that they never get it, saying this was all political. He has stood by Kavanaugh essentially since the very beginning. And he said going into the hearing that he was going to be standing by him. It was incredibly tense. We know during Ford's testimony, because of optics, the Republican senators, all male on the committee, did bring in an outside counsel, a sex crimes prosecutor, a woman, to question Ford. So that wasn't quite as tense or as heated. But then Senators stepping in when it became Kavanaugh, and there was a lot of yelling, a lot of contention. Actually, at one point, Kavanaugh apologized to Senator Amy Klobuchar, whose father is an alcoholic, when he was shouting at her if she drank. And he came back from a recess and said he was sorry for getting so upset, again, stating that his life was, on the line. His life had been ruined. His wife's life had been ruined, his children, and he was going to be forever tainted because of this situation.
Yeah, so what we have, Kristen, is this sort of event that happened, this alleged incident happened decades ago while they were both teenagers. It's been playing out right over the world. We're talking about the most politicised court appointment. Lindsey Graham, as you said, shouting, accusing the Democrats, but really, in a sense, the Republicans had delayed Barack Obama's appointee for the Supreme Court as well, waiting until the election to get greater numbers there. So it's a he said, she said political wise, and it's a he said, she said in terms of the substantive matter of what's being accused here. I mean, what can possibly come out of this?
Well, that's the big problem, is that not only does anyone know, but everyone just feels drained here. If you were watching it, if you live in Washington, if you cover politics, this was a horrible moment for American politics. It was so ugly, just the partisanness of the whole thing. It is not, we have not had in modern history a Supreme Court nominee be confirmed on party lines, like with no one crossing over from the other party. And it's possible that this could happen with Kavanaugh. And it just shows you how much things have changed in the last 10 years. Under Obama, it was very ugly, and it's gotten only uglier under President Trump. It's become a completely divided system, and we've seen both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party go to extremes, and that really played out here today. It was protesters, survivors screaming in the faces of Republican senators. Again, seeing these senators getting riled up, defending Kavanaugh. It was so much anger and tension, and that is really the takeaway here, is that this has become such a political event. And we are talking about people's lives.
Yes, and I've noticed, Kristen, that Donald Trump, of course, as you say, has been so politicised. He's numerous times come to the defence of Brett Kavanaugh, although he says, I think at one stage he said, I am open to being convinced, but I've got to see the evidence here. Kavanaugh says, I won't be bullied or intimidated into withdrawing from this process. You'd think his reputation would be pretty shot by now. But just talk us through briefly about what happens now. What's the political process? What's got to happen for him to be nominated or for his appointment to fall down?
So essentially here, there's a series of steps that has to take place. The first one is going to happen tomorrow morning. Now, we had some questions about whether or not this hearing would postpone this. Essentially, they set up a vote for the Senate Judiciary Committee. That is who you saw in the room today. That is the first step to confirm Kavanaugh. If a majority of the Senate Judiciary votes to confirm, he moves forward to the next round. Now, here's the big question on that vote. Republicans hold the majority in the committee, 11 to 10. But there is one holdout, one senator who has been on the fence, a Republican, Jeff Flake. He's retiring, so he doesn't have to answer to his constituents. And he has been incredibly critical of Donald Trump, even just days ago, taking to the Senate floor, saying how ugly politics was, clearly referring to President Trump and what was going on with the Kavanaugh situation and calling it really indecent in the process. And this is not the first time he's done this. Now, he has said on multiple occasions that he wanted the hearing. That's essentially one of the reasons we had the hearing to begin with, that he needed to hear both stories. He was asked tonight how he's going to vote tomorrow. He said he didn't know. This was after the hearing. He said that he found both of them to be credible and that he was going to have to sleep on it and think about it. Now, if he doesn't vote with his party, I would be very surprised. I know we're saying he's a holdout. I know he hasn't said it. But I still have a bit of a feeling that he might vote with his party. But if he doesn't, then Kavanaugh's nomination ends right there.
That's Kirsten Holmes in Washington at 18.5 minutes past 6. There's a plea tonight for the police to be removed from an investigation into whether a conveyor belt caused the second explosion at the Pike River mine. The families of the 29 men killed have released video footage that they say shows the second explosion was caused by the belt being switched on. The police say while the idea of turning it on was considered, they can find no evidence that it was authorised. They've nevertheless launched an investigation into the actions of those in charge of the 2010 rescue to ensure their actions did not cause the second explosion. A spokesperson for the victims' families, Bernie Monk, spoke to our reporter Conan Young.
Look, I'm not saying that the police aren't professional at their job, but I cannot understand how the police now can investigate themselves on what they did up at Pike River, because we've got the same people investigating the crime scene and everything else that were there at Pike River at the time when it happened. So, you know, one of the things that we'll be going to the authorities with is asking for a complete independent body to actually take over this investigation, because you can understand we don't trust anyone anymore, and we never have done for a long time, but this here is just the icing on the cake. To have people investigating themselves, it's not going to work.
So have you approached, who are you thinking of approaching, and have you approached them yet?
We would have to start looking at the authorities. Could start with the Police Complaints Authority or anyone that's got to do with this, or the Ombudsman. We'll have to start writing letters to make sure that an independent body gets put together to actually do the investigation.
Gotcha. Okay. Are you in the initial stages willing to let the police do their investigation and see what comes of that first?
Well, I mean, all they're saying is they haven't got this and they haven't got that. Well, isn't that natural that they say that when the same people are investigating themselves?
You guys have been working on this for 2 years now. How open have the police been in coming forward with information about, you know, the lead up to that second explosion? It's
been a battle. It's been a complete battle. We've done a huge amount of work, and you know, it's just unbelievable the way we've been treated, and we've got an excellent paper trail and everything else, and they're going to have to come back to us again, and we're just sitting back waiting.
Why, for the rest of the country, for people who haven't followed this as closely as you have, why is that second explosion so crucial?
Well, number one is, you know, we don't know whether anyone survived that. You know, like everyone says to you that no one survived the explosion at Pike River. Well, it's wrong, because 2 men got out of that mine alive. Now, if there was a fire down there and behind that fire there were survivors for a certain amount of time, they were given no chance, were they? They wouldn't have survived it after the second one, but we didn't give them a shot after the first one. So, you know, these are the questions that we want answered.
Bernie Monk. In a statement, the police say they will release all relevant documentation at the completion of their inquiry into whether the conveyor belt was started. They say Detective Superintendent Peter Reid has an advanced knowledge of the investigation into the Pike tragedy, and it is entirely appropriate that he retains oversight of the current police involvement with the re-entry planning. It's 22 minutes past 6. The Auckland Council's revealed rising leaky building costs, record infrastructure investment, and more staff earning six-figure salaries. The state of the council's finances have been released in its annual report. The council group, which includes organisations like the Port and Watercare, made a $660 million surplus. Tom Furley has been looking at the numbers.
As the country's largest city continues to grow, much of the pressure has been on meeting its mounting infrastructure deficit. The council invested a record $1.8 billion of capital expenditure on infrastructure, with about $250 million of that coming from additional borrowing. It says it's been able to meet its targets and manage costs. But the report also highlights several unexpected expenses, including $13 million of America's Cup spending. The council also had to add $82 million to provide for the increasing number of leaky building claims. The Group Financial Controller, Francis Catano, says they're now seeing more multi-unit developments with problems.
There are quite a few that are getting to the stage where they are likely to be going through the court process, and as that happens over the next couple of years, we'll settle on a lot of those and hopefully they'll go out. But whether there are any more coming, we're just not sure.
The Chief Executive of the Homeowners and Buyers Association, Roger Levy, has been through his own leaky home ordeal. He says a number of large claims in the pipeline are starting to reach a head.
I think there's a real push now for various reasons to get those going. Part of it is, people can see the increase in building costs looking into the future, and also a lot of these buildings are deteriorating to the point where they need either major maintenance or remedial work done on them. So, it's a waste of money to do a lot of maintenance if you've got to do major work. So I think that those drivers are pushing a lot of people to get on with their claims.
The council now has $320 million set aside to cover possible legal settlements in the next 10 years. There are more than 550 property claims currently reported, and it estimates there will be a further 800 it could be liable for. The annual report also shows the wages bill has shrunk by about $8 million despite the staff numbers growing slightly. However, more staff are earning over $100,000, rising from 1,150 to close to 1,300 staff. Across the whole council group, including council-owned companies like Watercare and the Port, 1 in 4 of the 10,000 staff are on 6-figure salaries. Chief Financial Officer Matthew Walker says the council needs to make sure it's attracting talent.
So whether it's in the engineering space, the planning space, finance, other disciplines, we employ a lot of qualified people, and we need good staff to make sure that things are being delivered in a safe and high quality, enduring kind of way.
Matthew Walker says the challenge will be to keep meeting the council's revenue and spending targets, with capital investment targeted to rise to $2.5 billion a year. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
It's 25.5 minutes past 6. Scientists fear that some killer whale populations around the world could collapse, all because of a toxic chemical banned more than 30 years ago. PCBs may have been banned decades ago, but they do subsist in the environment for a long time. Now researchers say blubber samples show they're accumulating in the bodies of cetaceans, especially killer whales, affecting their fertility and causing death through immunosuppression. The BBC's Victoria Gill has the story.
The ultimate marine predator is falling prey to an invisible threat: manufactured chemicals lingering in the ocean. Polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, that were once used to heat-proof everything from electrical components to paint and glue, are leaching into the marine environment and are found at toxic levels in the bodies of killer whales.
The very highest levels in the killer whales are actually levels that we think would completely suppress reproduction.
The effects of these chemicals have been at the heart of years of investigation by scientists, including this team from London's Institute of Zoology, who've carried out detailed post-mortems on the bodies of marine mammals.
The PCBs alone, no other threat, just the PCBs alone, is enough to cause the extinction of more than half of the world's killer whale populations, which is really devastating, really. It's a sort of killer whale apocalypse.
Polychlorinated biphenyls are extremely stable, heat-resistant chemicals. They were used in a huge range of products, including paints and sealants, until research revealed them to be toxic. They were widely banned in the 1980s. Their legacy, though, has proven just as toxic. The UN estimates that 14 million tonnes of PCBs have yet to be disposed of safely, and they may still be leaking from landfill sites today. In the ocean, it's killer whales, apex predators, who suffer the worst consequences.
It's killer whales positioned at the very top of the marine food chain that leaves them particularly exposed to these chemicals. The killer whales eat everything in the sea, from penguins to seals to even other species of whale. And because PCBs are everywhere in the environment, they're in every marine animal. So each contaminated meal is another dose of these chemicals.
They're also transmitted from mother to calf, pollution passed from generation to generation. But while this study forecasts a bleak future for many killer whale populations, scientists hope it will also provide a catalyst to clean up this chemical legacy, ensuring that populations that escaped it will continue to thrive.
Victoria Gill reporting. Tributes are flowing in for the creator of the iconic children's TV show Postman Pat. John Cunliffe has died, aged 85, in northern England. Postman Pat began in the early 1980s and was sold to more than 50 countries, including our own. The BBC's Tim Ullman has more.
Postman Pat and his black and white cat, a television favourite for generations of children. In the fictional town of Greendale, everyone was your friend, and every new day was an adventure.
Morning, Pat, said Mrs.
It was a place inspired by creator John Cunliffe's own home in the Lake District.
Who else lives in the countryside? And a postman, well, he travels around, he meets a lot of people, friendly character, and they said, sounds quite likely, I don't think anybody's done it. OK, you go back to Kendal and write an outline for 13 episodes.
Rosie and Jim, chugging along on the old rag doll.
John Cunliffe also wrote and appeared in Rosie and Jim, another gentle programme aimed at entertaining and educating youngsters. Born in Colne in Lancashire, he had been a librarian and a teacher. He would go on to write nearly 200 books, also several volumes of poetry. But he will be best remembered for Postman Pat, a character of genuine warmth and charm who lived in the hearts of millions of children.
Tim Orman reporting. That's all we've got time for this evening. Hey, don't go hard on Katrina Batten. She was right in that we do lose an hour for daylight saving because we spring forward and we fall back for fall. Spring forward for spring, don't forget it. If you do, you'll miss us at 5 o'clock on Monday evening. Do join us then. In the meantime, have a great weekend.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The High Court has ruled 2 high-profile prisoners were unlawfully strip-searched at an Auckland prison. Ruapehu Alpine Lifts ageing bus fleet has been replaced following the death of an 11-year-old girl in July. Several people have been treated in hospital after an Air New Guinea plane crashed into a Micronesia lagoon. And British media are reporting a 3rd Russian military intelligence officer has been identified in the Novichok poisoning case. Our next news and weather is at 7.
There's a few people who have signed twice. There's a couple of duplicate sheets. I was doing research on the fashion of wearing feathers in New Zealand in the late 19th century, and one of the places where they were conspicuously absent was when one of Seddon's daughters got married.
Growing up as children and someone misbehaved, she would say to them, well, you can't behave like a wretched little colonial.
Beyond Kate, exploring women's suffrage 125 years after women